Life might not need water. It might not even need a warm place. There's this idea, a theory, really about silicon-based life, living in lakes of liquid methane. Under a permanent orange sky, it's one of space's big mysteries. What would keep something alive there? In flowing methane, could a whole biology be built from sand? Instead of flesh, this takes us to a moon where the chemistry follows different rules, alien rules. It challenges everything we assume is necessary. For life, for existence, how would you recognize it if it looked nothing like us? Titan. It's a real place just past Saturn's rings, and it's the only other world we know of, besides Earth, that has stable liquid right there on the surface. But it's not water, it's liquid methane. It sits in lakes, flows in rivers, all under this thick orange sky. The temperature never changes. It's minus 180 degrees. At that cold, water isn't a liquid, it's a stone, but methane, which is a gas here, it flows there. It has its own cycle, hydrocarbon clouds in that nitrogen atmosphere. They rain methane, they rain ethane, that rain carves the land. It fills these dark, vast seas. The biggest one is Kraken Mare. It's larger than any of the Great Lakes. So you have this landscape. The shapes are familiar, river channels, shorelines, but the substance is alien. The Cassini mission showed us. It gave us the details. A lake there isn't what a lake is here. To even think about life in that place, you have to forget how things work here. The rules are different. The chemistry is different. So the foundation for life, if it existed, would have to be different too. You have to ask what replaces the molecules we know, the ones that need water. What takes their place? Silicon instead of carbon. That's the trade. On Earth, carbon builds everything alive. It makes proteins, DNA, the structures in our cells. It's versatile, it's strong, it links up in complex ways, but it's not the only one that can do that. Look at the periodic table. Directly below carbon, you have silicon. They share a key trait. A silicon atom can form 4 bonds just like carbon. It can link hands, it can create chains and frameworks. That's the starting point. What if life used silicon as its backbone? It sounds like a simple swap, but it changes everything because silicon isn't a perfect copy. Its bonds are weaker. And here on Earth, in our warm, oxygen-rich world, silicon has a fatal flaw. It loves oxygen too much. It reacts. It forms silicon dioxide. That's quartz. That's sand. That's rock. Here, a complex silicon molecule would just turn to stone. It would fossilize before it could function. But Titan is not Earth. There's no free oxygen in that thick orange atmosphere. It's not warm. It's profoundly cold. And that changes the equation. In that cryogenic sea of liquid methane, the weakness of silicon on Earth might become its strength. The reactions that would destroy it here are impossible there. Silicon-based molecules could achieve a kind of frozen stability, where carbon-based molecules would become sluggish and inert in that cold. Silicon structures might stay just flexible enough, just active enough to carry out the processes of life. They wouldn't need the frantic pace of Earth's biochemistry. Their chemistry would be slower, more deliberate, built for endurance in the deep freeze. So it's not just swapping one brick for another, it's redesigning the entire blueprint from the ground up. For a world where the rules of construction are fundamentally different, the architecture would be alien in its very foundations. That profound cold solves one problem, but then it creates another. Life needs a liquid, a medium where molecules can move and meet. On Earth, that's water. It's the solvent, the stage for all the chemistry. But on Titan, water is solid. It's rock. The liquid there in those rivers is methane. So for any life on that world, methane isn't just a place to live. It has to be the solvent itself. And that's a radical shift. Water is polar. It has a slight charge, so it dissolves salts and sugars. It's good for fast reactions. Methane is the opposite. It's non-polar. It's thin, like an oil. It doesn't dissolve what water does. It dissolves other things, non-polar organics, the kind that might form in that atmosphere. So picture the environment, not a watery cell, but an oily one. A droplet of liquid methane holding a different set of pieces, all suspended in that cold sea. The chemistry inside would be slow, glacial. Reactions that take a second here might take days there, years. There's no rushing in that freeze, so the metabolism of such a creature would have to be built for patience. It wouldn't burn sugars with oxygen. That fiery release is impossible. Instead, it might do a slow rearrangement, molecules like acetylene or ethane. These hydrocarbons rain down on the surface. The energy harvest would be subtle. It might come from gentle gradients on the lake beds where compounds slowly diffuse. The whole idea of eating and breathing is rewritten. It becomes less about consumption, more about a stately, perpetual realignment of the environment it floats in. The switch from water to methane changes everything. It dictates the speed, the fuel, the architecture of the cell itself. It asks us to consider an existence where time is on a different scale. Where vitality isn't in heat and speed, but in cold, deliberate persistence. The architecture starts with the molecules. Carbon-based life uses hydrocarbons, so a silicon-based biology might use silanes. A chain where silicon replaces carbon bonded to hydrogen. In Titan's oxygen-free environment, these silane chains could grow long and complex, forming stable polymers. They'd be the structural beams, the scaffolding, but a creature needs more than beams. It needs membranes to separate inside from outside. That's where a second class of molecules comes in, siloxanes. Chains of alternating silicon and oxygen. On Earth, we call them silicones. They're in sealants, lubricants, materials that stay flexible across extreme temperatures. In the methane lakes, a siloxane-based film could perform the most vital function. It could form a cellular membrane, not a fatty bilayer from our world, but a thin, resilient film, stable in that non-polar solvent. It would create a delicate pouch holding an internal droplet of methane-based cytoplasm separate from the external sea. The fabric of this being would be entirely new. Not the watery protoplasm of an Earth cell, more like a slow-moving gel or a resilient, rubbery matrix holding complex silane structures in suspension. Its cellular architecture wouldn't be a bag of water. It would be a droplet within a droplet, a distinct pocket of chemistry maintained by a membrane built for endurance. This presents a form so novel we might struggle to recognize its boundaries. Would it feel solid, or would it be a cohesive, flowing entity, its structure defined more by chemical gradients than by a rigid wall? The life form might resemble less an animal and more a drifting, intentional pattern within the liquid, a persistent configuration of molecules that maintains itself. But a structure isn't enough. It needs a spark, a source of power. On Earth, that spark for most life is the sun, captured by plants, or the oxygen we breathe. On Titan, both of those are impossible. The sun is just a dim, hazy smudge, and there's no free oxygen in that thick orange sky. So the question becomes not just what you're built from, but how you move, how you grow, how you sustain yourself in that deep freeze. The answer is in the chemistry of the world itself, a process called chemosynthesis. Instead of drawing energy from light, a life form would draw it from chemical reactions in its environment. It would be feeding on the landscape. One of the most promising reactions involves a simple molecule that rains from the sky, acetylene. On Titan's surface, acetylene could slowly react with hydrogen, turning into ethane. And that transformation, in those specific conditions, releases a tiny amount of energy. It's not a roaring fire. It's more like the faint, steady glow of a single ember. An organism could be built to catalyze that reaction, to capture that whisper of energy and use it to power its slow, internal processes, or it might tap into subtle chemical gradients. Hydrogen gas seeping up from the lakebed sediment could create a faint difference in concentration between the bottom of a lake and its surface. A life form could position itself to exploit that difference, using the slow diffusion of molecules as its battery. The metabolism that results would be unimaginably slow by our standards. A single metabolic cycle, what we might think of as a breath or a heartbeat, could take years. A full life cycle from whatever passes for birth to a resting state might span centuries or even millennia. This isn't biology as a sprint, it's biology as a glacier. An existence measured not in seasons but in the slow carving of river channels, the shifting of shorelines over eons. The very pace of thought, of reaction, of being, would be calibrated to the geological clock of the moon itself. It redefines what it means to be alive, not as a state of frantic activity, but as a state of profound, patient persistence, a slow burn in the dark. A structure and an energy source aren't enough. You need a memory. A system needs instructions, a way to pass them on, to rebuild itself across generations. On Earth, that's DNA, that elegant ladder. It's built for water. In Titan's cold, oily seas, DNA would be inert, just a frozen sculpture. So what takes its place? What's the blueprint for a silicon-based life? Theorists have proposed something new. A molecule not made from sugars and phosphates, but from silicon and oxygen, arranged differently. A silicon ester, or maybe a complex silane polymer. Picture a chain of silicon atoms linked together. That chain could be the spine, and along that spine you could attach different chemical groups. Like beads on a string, the sequence of those beads, their specific order that could carry the code, the information. Instead of 4 genetic letters, the code might use a handful of different side groups, each one representing an instruction for building a protein analog or regulating a metabolic pathway. The molecule itself would probably be linear. Or maybe form a slow, loose helix, stable in that non-polar methane solvent. It wouldn't need DNA's frantic replication speed. Its replication would be stately. Deliberate, one chain acting as a template, attracting floating pieces from the liquid, linking them together one by one, over what we'd call an achingly long time. Days, weeks, maybe longer, and in that slowness there's a challenge and a strange advantage. Errors would be inevitable, a misplaced bead on the string. But with a metabolism measured in years and a life cycle that could span centuries, there would be time. Vast amounts of time for correction mechanisms to work, or for the errors themselves to be tested by the environment over and over. A slow-motion version of natural selection. This speculative genetics gives you heredity that's as durable and cold-adapted as the organism. A frozen library written in silicon and methane, copied with glacial patience. It suggests the spark of life isn't in the heat. It's in the persistence of information. A whisper of order maintained against the cold, dark tide of entropy for eons. The cell itself would be a world of slow machinery, deliberate machinery. You picture its interior not as a water-filled city, but as a viscous gel, an oily gel all suspended in that liquid methane. Every structure inside has to be built for that medium. There are no watery solutions. The fluid that fills the cell, the cytoplasm, it's based on methane, a non-polar sea. Only certain molecules can dissolve there. Only certain things can interact, and that changes the function of everything. Energy storage. On Earth, we store sugars. In this cell, energy might be kept in solid form. Specialized compartments like vacuoles could hold crystalline acetylene or other hydrocarbon ices, a slow-burning fuel reserve for that patient metabolism. When energy is needed, a tiny fragment of this solid reserve dissolves, gets processed. It would release its chemical glow over a long period, a pantry for a feast that lasts years. Then there's the machinery of construction. Our cells have ribosomes, tiny machines that read instructions and build proteins fast. A Titan-based organism would need an analog, a structure to assemble its silane-based blocks. But in that cold, thick fluid, nothing happens quickly. These assembly structures would operate at a glacial fraction of the speed. A single complex molecule might take days to assemble, link by careful link. That pace is dictated by the environment. Rushing isn't just impossible. It's counterproductive. Movement is another puzzle. The liquid methane is denser than water, more viscous. Swimming like a fish here would be inefficient. So movement might come from slow undulations, graceful undulations of a flexible membrane, or perhaps the organism controls its buoyancy with exquisite care. Internal pockets of gas, carefully regulated, could let it rise or sink through the lake layers, following chemical gradients or temperature differences. With stately purpose, it would drift more than swim, a deliberate traveler in the dark. And waste, in our biology, waste is dissolved and expelled. In this chemistry, the byproducts might be insoluble polymers, chains of molecules that just fall out of solution. The organism might excrete these as tiny pellets, gravel-like pellets, solid bits of spent chemistry, settling slowly to the lakebed below. This whole cellular design speaks to one principle: stability over speed. It's architecture for endurance. Every organelle, every process is optimized not for rapid growth, but for persistent operation, efficient operation. In a world where time is the most abundant resource, it's a clockwork biology built to tick once per century, and to keep ticking for millennia. That orange haze isn't just a sky. It's a factory, a planet-wide chemical reactor. Titan's atmosphere is where the complexity comes from. Up there in that thick nitrogen, you have solar ultraviolet light. You have cosmic rays. They have immense energy. They slam into the simple molecules. Methane and nitrogen, they break the bonds apart, and that creates a soup of reactive fragments, radicals. And when these fragments collide, they don't just go back. They form something new, something more complex. Chains become rings, rings stack together. You get large organic molecules, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. They're sooty, carbon-rich structures. And there's something else, a more complex class. Planetary scientists call them tholins. Tholins aren't a single molecule. They're a messy mixture of organics. They form when radiation zaps simpler compounds, and they're thought to be responsible for the color, that reddish-orange haze. It coats the entire moon, and here's the crucial part. These complex molecules are heavy. They clump together, they condense, and they fall, they rain down. A slow, perpetual drizzle of organic complexity, settling onto the icy surface, drifting into the dark lakes below. This is the atmospheric feedstock. A constant delivery of building blocks from the sky. For any biochemistry in those methane seas, this isn't just a possibility, it's a necessity. The lakes themselves are simple. Methane and ethane, they're relatively poor in complex chemistry. They are the solvent, the stage, but the actors, the complex molecules that could form structures, they are falling from above. The atmosphere is the farm, the rain is the harvest, the lakes are the pantry, a steady supply of organic material dissolved into that liquid methane. A rich, subtle broth. For a silicon-based life form, these tholins and pHs could be the essential starting materials. They provide the carbon, the nitrogen, the structural diversity. A slow, silane-based biochemistry could use them. It could incorporate fragments of these fallen sky molecules, rearrange them, build upon them so the atmosphere transforms from a passive blanket into an active participant. It's the engine, it produces the raw organic wealth. It seeds the lakes with chemical complexity that could make a cryptic biosphere not just possible, perhaps even probable. It suggests life on such a world wouldn't arise in isolation. It would be a product of the entire atmospheric cycle, a child of the sky born in the deep, cold sea. The theory is remarkable, but it needs a place. A real one, and in our solar system, there's one world that fits: Titan. It's not just a candidate, it's the prime candidate. People talk about Europa, Enceladus, their subsurface oceans. Those are water worlds. We understand that chemistry, at least partly. Titan is different. It's the only other world we know of with stable liquid right on the surface. Rivers, lakes, and seas, it has a full hydrological cycle, but it's a hydrocarbon cycle. Methane clouds form. It rains, that rain carves the land, fills the basins. Then it evaporates back into that thick orange sky. This isn't some static pond. It's dynamic, weather-driven, and that dynamism is key. It provides movement. It mixes things. It sets up the conditions for complexity. The atmosphere itself is a shield. That dense nitrogen blanket protects the surface from space radiation. It creates a stable environment, a place where delicate chemistry can persist for eons. More than a shield, it's an engine. It manufactures complex organics. Solvents, they rain down as a constant feedstock. So you have the liquid solvent, the methane. You have the building blocks, the solvents, and you have potential energy sources. Acetylene raining from the sky, hydrogen seeping from below. Titan has all the necessary ingredients, arranged in a system that's likely been stable for billions of years. That combination is unique. It turns the idea of silicon methane life from a thought experiment into something tangible, testable. We have real data from Cassini. Detailed maps of its shorelines. We know what its lakes are made of, and soon we'll have more. The Dragonfly Mission, a rotorcraft designed to fly across Titan's surface. It will land in the next decade. It won't dive into the lakes, but it will analyze the complex chemistry on the surface, in the dunes near the dry lake beds. It will look for chemical signatures, for patterns that might hint at something beyond geology. It will search for biosignatures of a biology we've never seen. Built not for our world, but for that one. This is what sets Titan apart. It's a complete, functioning analog to Earth's water-based system, but built from entirely different parts. It's a laboratory the size of a planet, waiting for us to read the results. The question isn't just could such life exist. The question is, in this specific, remarkable place, did it? Science fiction writers have been imagining silicon life for over a century. In those old stories, in magazines and movies, these creatures were slow. Rocky, more like minerals. They were fascinating ideas, but they stayed fantasy. To take that idea into real theoretical biology, you need more than a story. You need a different way of thinking, a philosophical shift. For a very long time, our definition of life has been narrow. It had to be. It's been geocentric. Anthropocentric. We only have one example, us, and everything here, so the checklist came from what we see. It needs liquid water. It's based on carbon. It uses DNA. It exists in certain temperatures. That checklist is useful. It guides the search, but it's also a cage. It assumes life everywhere has to look and act and be built like life here. The idea of a silicon-based thing in a lake on Titan breaks that assumption. It forces a more basic question. What is the core of being alive if you take away all the Earth details? A lot of biologists and philosophers point to a simpler definition, a self-sustaining chemical system, one that can undergo Darwinian evolution. That's it. No water mentioned, no warmth, no specific molecule, just a system that can maintain itself, replicate with some variation, and be shaped by its environment over time. By that definition, a slow, cold structure based on silane, drifting in Kraken Mare and feeding on acetylene rain, that absolutely qualifies. it's a chemical persistence. A pattern that keeps its order against chaos and changes slowly across generations. Expanding the idea like this, it's not just about finding another possible home for life. It's a conceptual liberation. It says the principles of life, the drive to persist, to adapt, to become complex, they aren't tied to Earth's chemistry. They're universal laws of organization. They can express themselves in completely different materials. Carbon on a warm, wet rock is one expression. Silicon in a frigid methane sea is another. Seeing this, it does more than give us more places to look. It deepens what we understand life to be. It shows biology isn't a singular, fragile accident. It's a probable, robust phenomenon of the universe, a phenomenon that can paint with a much broader palette than we thought. So the search changes. It becomes not a search for life as we know it, but for the signature of any persistent, evolving chemistry. And that signature might be written in the slow, silent language of a frozen sea. The key is that neither carbon nor silicon is better. They're just tools for different jobs. You have to look at them in different places, under different pressures. Start with extreme heat, Earth's volcanic hot springs. In that scalding, acidic water, the complex carbon molecules that make up our cells, they fall apart. They denature, the bonds can't hold, but a silicon-based polymer, built with those stronger silicon-oxygen bonds, it might endure. It could keep its structure where carbon fails. The heat is a test and silicon passes. Now flip it. Take our everyday oxygen-rich air. Here, silicon has its great weakness. It reacts eagerly with oxygen. It locks into a rigid crystalline network. It becomes quartz, it becomes sand, it becomes stone. In our world, a complex silicon biology would petrify. It would turn to rock before it could function. Carbon, in that same oxygen-rich air, does something different. It forms carbon dioxide, a gas. It can be part of a cycle. It doesn't lock up, so in our context, carbon is the clear winner. It's flexible, it's recyclable, it's the foundation of everything we know. This comparison shows the truth. It's not a cosmic contest between elements. It's about context, the specific, unforgiving rules of a given world. Each element has a domain where it excels. Carbon's domain is the warm, wet, oxidizing environments like Earth. Silicon's domain could be the cold, reducing, hydrocarbon-saturated worlds like Titan. On that moon, in those methane lakes, the tables are turned. The cold that would make carbon chemistry sluggish and inert might be the perfect cradle for silicon. The lack of free oxygen removes silicon's greatest threat, and the liquid methane solvent, that non-polar sea, could be ideal for dissolving and assembling the long silane polymers that carbon struggles to form in such a setting. In that specific, alien context, silicon isn't just an alternative. It could have the decisive advantage. Its stability becomes a virtue. Its slower reaction rates become a feature, not a bug, for a metabolism paced to a geological clock. This is the insight from comparative biochemistry. Life isn't about finding the one perfect molecule. It's about exploitation. It's a process that seizes whatever chemistry the local environment offers most readily and builds a persistent, evolving system from it. On a world built for carbon, life will use carbon. On a world built for silicon, life, if it arises, will almost certainly use silicon. The universe isn't biased. It just provides the raw materials, and life, in its drive to persist, finds a way to use them. Knowing if you found it, that's the real challenge for something like Dragonfly. You won't see bones, you won't see footprints. You're listening for whispers in the chemistry. The sign might be an absence, a place in the methane sea where acetylene is a little lower than it should be. Or a layer of sediment where one particular silane is more abundant. Those would be metabolic fingerprints, the faint scent of a slow chemical feast. But nature does chemistry on its own, without life. Complex organic molecules can form through geology, crystals grow, structures assemble themselves. So the puzzle becomes distinction. How do you tell a living silicon-based cell from a lifeless organic crystal that just formed by chance? That's the problem of biogenicity. And for a biology with no earthly parallel, our usual rulebook doesn't work. We need new rules, new signatures that say life in a language we don't speak. Scientists think we might look for a few clues. The first is chirality. Many molecules essential for life on Earth, like amino acids, come in two mirror image forms. Left and right hands, chemistry without life usually makes a 50-50 mix of both, but life is picky. It uses just one hand. All earthly life uses left-handed amino acids. So if Dragonfly found a deposit of complex organics on Titan, and every single one had the same handedness, that would be a powerful hint. Not definitive, but a hint of biological selection. Another clue is persistent chemical disequilibrium. A lake left to geology and chemistry will eventually settle into a stable, balanced state, but life is a disturbance. It takes in compounds and excretes others, creating pockets where the chemistry is persistently out of balance. Finding a local environment on Titan that's chemically unstable in a specific, sustained way, like an unexpected abundance of hydrogen gas right at the lakebed, could signal an ongoing process. A metabolism maintaining that imbalance. Then there's the signature of specified complexity. A sand dune is complex, but its form isn't specified by a code. A snowflake is structured, but that structure repeats predictably. Life creates complexity with a purpose. It builds microscopic structures, membranes, filaments, compartments, with a high degree of order that serves a function. Under a microscope, a fossilized remnant of a Titan organism might not look like a cell. It might look like a layered mat or a network of tiny tubes. But if its architecture shows a redundant, intricate pattern that couldn't reasonably form through simple crystallization, it points toward design, not intelligent design, but the design imposed by evolution. A pattern that persists because it helps something survive. So the search becomes a detective story at the molecular level. It pushes our detection to its limits, asking instruments not just to identify chemicals, but to read the story they tell. To listen for the faint, rhythmic signature of persistence amidst the random noise of geology. It means looking at Titan not as a frozen wasteland, but as a cryptic manuscript. Written in a dialect of carbon, silicon, and cold, and the first step to reading it is to admit we don't yet know the alphabet. These are theories, of course. Equations and imagination. To know if they're true, you have to test them, and we don't need to land on Titan to start. We can use a lab, a proxy for that world. Scientists recreate it in small glass chambers here on Earth. They take a steel vessel, cool it down to the deep chill of -180 degrees. Fill it with liquid nitrogen, or sometimes with care they liquefy methane itself. Into this small cryogenic sea, they add the raw ingredients, silane gases. Simple hydrocarbons, acetylene, ethane. They simulate the energy too. Ultraviolet lamps for the faint sunlight, or electrical discharges like contained lightning for the cosmic rays that hit Titan's atmosphere. Then they watch, they wait, they analyze. The goal isn't to create life in a jar, not yet. The goal is to watch chemistry under those alien rules, to see what pathways open up, what structures begin to form on their own, and the results are fascinating. In these simulated Titan environments, researchers have seen amino acids form. The building blocks of proteins here on Earth. They've seen the precursors to DNA and RNA, the nucleotide bases, assemble themselves from simple chaos. That's profound. It tells us the chemistry that led to our biology isn't unique to a warm, wet Earth. That same probiotic pathway can start in a freezing vat of methane under an ultraviolet lamp. It suggests the universe might be biased toward creating the pieces of life, even if it later builds with different plans. More directly, for silicon-based theories, these experiments produce tholins. That complex reddish-brown organic gunk that colors Titan's sky. In the lab, it forms just as predicted, a tarry mixture of long-chain molecules, and within that mixture, scientists see hints of polymerization. The linking of smaller units into longer, more complex chains. They see structures that could, given time and the right conditions, begin to show a kind of order. A rudimentary self-organization. No one has made a silane-based cell that maintains itself, but the lab work gives us ground truth. It proves the chemistry is active. It proves the energy is there to be tapped. It proves that in an environment built of methane and cold, complexity doesn't just survive, it arises, it flourishes. So the ultimate form of Titanian life is still a mystery, but these experiments tell us the canvas is prepared. The paints are mixed, and the laws of chemistry are already sketching potential shapes in the dark. On a world where a single chemical reaction could take a year, evolution tells a different story. The timescale stretches, it warps completely. For us, a generation is a day for bacteria, a year for a mouse, a few decades for a human. Natural selection works with that rhythm. It iterates, it experiments across thousands of generations in a geological blink. But on Titan, in those deep, cold seas, the rhythm changes. The metronome slows to a crawl. A generation time there for some methane drifter could be a century, a millennium, maybe even longer. Its replication, that stately assembly of a silane-based code, is a monumental thing. It happens with glacial patience. In that environment, one evolutionary step, a tiny beneficial change spreading through a population, might take 100,000 years. Or 1,000,000. Natural selection doesn't stop, but it operates on a timescale we link to continental drift, not to life. This opens a staggering possibility. If life did take hold in Titan's early history, maybe during a slightly warmer period billions of years ago, it has had an almost incomprehensible amount of time to evolve. But evolve toward what? In an environment of such profound and stable cold, where the chemistry of the lakes and the atmosphere has been consistent for eons, the pressure to change might be almost zero. Once a form finds a perfect, efficient harmony with that frozen, methane-soaked world, why would it alter? This could be a biosphere in profound stasis. It may have reached its peak adaptation billions of years ago and just persisted. A masterpiece of frozen engineering, unchanged while entire species rose and fell on Earth. The creatures in those lakes today, if they are there, might be living fossils of a kind we can't fathom. Not just relics from a distant past, but the direct, uninterrupted continuation of that past into the present. Now contrast that with our own planet's story. Earth is a theater of relentless change. Ice ages come and go. Continents crash together and tear apart. Asteroids strike, the atmosphere transforms. This chaos is an engine for evolution. It forces life to adapt, to diversify, to innovate in a frantic race. Our biology is a product of emergency, of constant dynamic response. Titan's theoretical biology would be the opposite. It is a product of perfect, enduring stability. It is biology as a monument, a testament to finding one perfect solution and holding onto it forever. Considering these vast, slow timescales expands our view of biological history in the cosmos. It suggests the universe might not only be full of life, but full of very old, very patient life. Biospheres where change is measured in the slow ticking of a star's lifetime, not in the quick pulse of seasons. We might be the outliers, the frantic, fast-evolving newcomers in a galaxy dominated by ancient, contemplative forms of existence. So looking into the dark mirror of Kraken Mare, we aren't just looking for life. We might be looking into a living past, a preserved chapter of biological history, written at a pace so deliberate we are only now learning how to read it. A methane lake could be its own world. Inside it, in that dark and cold, you'd get different places, different rules, different things to use, and if life is there, it would specialize. It would diversify. Over centuries, you could get a simple ecology. The first place is the surface. Sunlight on Titan is 1,000 times dimmer than Earth's. It's a permanent twilight, but for a chemistry that's patient, even that faint light is a resource. The very top layer, where the methane meets the orange haze, that's a zone for photochemistry. Ultraviolet light breaking molecules apart. The simplest life might be there, buoyant structures. They wouldn't be plants, more like slow-growing films. They could float, absorbing compounds from the air or capturing energy from those faint reactions. They'd be the primary producers, the foundation, drifting mats, turning the sky's whisper into something chemical. Then you go deeper, down toward the lakebed. It's perpetual darkness, immense pressure, but it might not be dead. On Earth, the deep ocean floor has hydrothermal vents. Hot, mineral-rich water. On Titan, an analogous process could happen, cryovolcanism. Instead of molten rock, it's warmer water ammonia slurries seeping up from a subsurface ocean. These would be cryovents. In the absolute cold of the lake, even a fluid a few degrees warmer is a major heat source, and it carries a different chemistry. Dissolved salts, ammonia, complex organics from deep inside the moon. Around these slow seeps, a different community could thrive, dense mats of silane-based organisms clinging to the vent structures. They wouldn't need the faint light from above. Their energy would come from the chemical difference between the vent fluid and the cold methane lake. They'd be the grazers of the deep, consuming the rich sediment, the tholin sludge that rains down from above. Their metabolism would be even slower, fueled by a steady geothermal trickle. Between those two extremes is the water column itself, the vast middle of the lake, and along its edges the shoreline. On Titan, the shore isn't rock or sand. It's likely an organic beach, water ice as hard as granite, coated with layers of that reddish tholin gunk that falls from the sky. Where the liquid methane washes against this soft coastline, another niche opens. The intertidal zone of a hydrocarbon sea. Here, organisms might have adapted to a semi-solid existence. Structures that anchor in the soft tholin, maybe extending filaments into the liquid to feed. Or forms that creep between solid and liquid states, using both. That variety could drive different forms. Beyond the floaters and the grazer mats, there might be something like a predator. Not a fast hunter, a patient absorber, a larger, more complex silane structure that drifts through the water column, its membrane tuned to slowly engulf and dissolve smaller floaters or fragments of organic matter. Its movement would be a slow, deliberate engulfing, a process that might take months. It wouldn't be predation as a chase. It would be predation as a stately, inevitable consumption. A reabsorption of complexity back into the system that gives you an outline of a food web, a slow, silent web. The floaters harvest energy from the sky. They are consumed by the slow drifters. Both, when their cycles end, settle as organic snow to the lakebed, feeding the vent communities. The vent communities might release gases or compounds that slowly bubble back up, enriching the water column. It's an ecology of grand, patient cycles. It shows a principle. Life isn't just about existing, it's about interaction. It's about filling every possible role in an environment. Creating a network of dependencies that stabilizes the whole system. Even in a frozen sea under an alien sky, that drive to connect, to specialize, to build a community, that could be a fundamental law. Silicon has its own set of constraints. The bonds it makes are longer and weaker than carbon's, so the molecular scaffolding in a silicon-based cell might be less sturdy. That could limit how large its structures become, how intricate they get. It's like building a complex tower with beams that have more flex. They might not support the same weight. The same complexity, and silicon is far less inclined to form double or triple bonds. That's what gives carbon its incredible versatility, allows for the vast diversity of organic molecules we see. This simpler bonding repertoire means a more limited chemical vocabulary, a smaller set of building blocks to construct the machinery of life, but the most critical vulnerability is its ancient nemesis. In any environment with even trace amounts of oxygen or water, silicon's fate is sealed. It reacts, it locks into rigid silicon-oxygen networks, it turns to stone. For a hypothetical silicon organism, this isn't a slow illness. It would be an immediate and total solidification, a return to geology, so the window for such life is extraordinarily narrow. It requires a world that is not just cold and rich in hydrocarbons. It has to be utterly free of free oxygen and liquid water for its entire history. Titan qualifies, but it shows how specific the cradle must be, how rare. Given these severe constraints, some argue silicon biochemistry might only achieve a rudimentary level of organization. Maybe self-replicating crystals, simple, cyclic chemical systems, but could it cross the threshold into complex, information-rich, evolving systems? The doubts are serious. Swapping a fundamental element isn't a simple upgrade. It's a complete re-engineering with inherent trade-offs. Acknowledging these limits defines the boundary conditions. It tells us that if silicon life exists, it isn't a superior alternative to carbon life, or even an equal one. It's a different, more constrained path. One that has to solve the problems of complexity and evolution within a tighter chemical box. It would be a testament to life's ingenuity, proving it can build a cathedral even when given only a limited set of weaker tools. The Fermi paradox asks where everyone is. If the universe is so big and so old, you'd think we'd see something, but that question makes an assumption. It assumes that life, if it's out there, would follow a path like ours, that it would build things, use energy, send signals, try to reach the stars. But then you have Titan, the possible life in its methane lakes that suggests something else, a whole different category. You could call it undetectable life. Think about what that is. It's submerged in a dark, cold sea under an orange sky you can't see through. Its metabolism is incredibly slow. Its evolution happens over geological time. It has no need for fire. Fire isn't even possible there. It has no concept of radio. Its environment doesn't lead to electromagnetism. Its whole reality is a slow chemical conversation. In liquid methane, a biosphere like that leaves no signature we're looking for, no technosignatures, no city lights, no structured radio pulses. It would be a silent neighbor. Even in a star system full of it, this kind of life could be common all across the galaxy. Every icy moon around a gas giant, every distant world with the right mix of cold and hydrocarbons. They could each have their own version of this patient, cryptic biology. They might be the true galactic norm, while a world like Earth, with its frantic, oxygen-fueled technological explosion, that might be the rare exception. It changes how you see the Fermi paradox. The great silence we hear might not be emptiness. It could be a chorus of whispers in a language we're only starting to imagine. We've been listening for a shout on a frequency we understand, but the cosmos might be filled with a slow, deep hum from an entirely different kind of being. These parallel biological universes would exist alongside ours, separated not by distance but by the fundamental rules of their chemistry and their sense of time. They aren't failed civilizations, they're successful, enduring biological systems. They found a stable, sustainable harmony with their environment, and they never felt the need or never had the means to break out of it. So the answer to where is everybody might be right next door, in the dark seas of moons we've already found, living an existence so alien that we look right at it and just see a frozen wasteland. The paradox dissolves when you realize we've been searching for a reflection of ourselves, while the universe is full of portraits, painted in entirely different colors. On canvases we are only now learning to see. That silent neighbor might finally be heard. Dragonfly is the direct answer to the theory. It's a rotorcraft, a drone built for an alien world. Its launch is set for 2028. It'll travel through the dark, arriving at Titan years later, and it will do something no other craft has done. It will fly through that thick orange atmosphere over the dark dunes and the icy plains. It won't land in a methane lake. That technology is still far off. Instead, it'll touch down in the Shangri-La Dune Fields, a vast windswept region, but it's a perfect vantage point. The dunes aren't made of sand, they're grains of organic material. Hydrocarbon particles coated in tholins that have settled from the sky over eons. Dragonfly will land on a beach made of the very building blocks we've been talking about. Its instruments are a chemist's dream. Mass spectrometers will vaporize tiny samples of this organic sand and identify every molecule inside. They'll look for the complex organics, the long chains, the rings, the polymers, and they'll search for something even more specific, the presence of silicon within those organic structures. Finding silanes, or complex silicon-bearing molecules mixed into the tholin dunes, would be a monumental clue. It would prove silicon is actively participating in Titan's organic chemistry. That it's not just an inert mineral but a player. The mission will also look for patterns, for the biosignatures of a biology we've never seen. It will measure isotope ratios. Living processes often prefer lighter versions of atoms, so if Dragonfly finds a patch where the carbon is unusually light, that could be a fingerprint. A sign of metabolic selection. It will search for molecular handedness, that uniform chirality. If every amino acid in a sample points the same way, that's a powerful signal of biological activity. Not definitive but powerful. Most importantly, Dragonfly will provide context. It won't just analyze one spot. It will fly. It will travel tens of kilometers between sites. It will sample the dunes, then an icy plain, then the rim of an ancient impact crater. This lets scientists map the chemistry to see how these complex molecules are distributed. Is there a strange depletion of acetylene in one area, an unexpected concentration of a particular silane near a geological feature? These patterns, these chemical landscapes, are the data we need. They'll transform our elegant equations and lab simulations into a real, messy, complex picture of Titan's surface. Dragonfly isn't going to find a swimming creature. It's going to search for the chemical echoes of an entire possible biosphere. It's listening for the faint, frozen whisper of a different kind of life. And in that whisper, we might finally begin to understand our place in a much stranger and much more patient universe. The old map for life was drawn in water. For a long time, we looked at the Goldilocks zone, that narrow band around a star where it's warm enough for liquid water. That view put Earth in a perfect spot. It made the outer solar system, with its gas giants and frozen moons, seem like a biological desert. But Titan changes all of that. It's far outside our sun's water-based habitable zone. It's in a permanent deep freeze, and yet it has everything we think a world needs to bear life, just not with water, so we have to shift our thinking. We have to consider a cryogenic habitable zone, or a hydrocarbon habitable zone, a zone defined not by warmth, but by the presence of a stable, alternative liquid, and the chemical energy to use it. In our own system, this zone covers the orbits of the gas giants: Saturn, Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune. Each one is surrounded by icy moons. Many of them are now thought to have oceans beneath their ice, but Titan is different. Its liquid is right there on the surface. It interacts with a thick, complex atmosphere. It's the prototype for this new kind of habitable world, and if life can exist in Titan's dark seas, then the implications for the galaxy are huge. Suddenly, the most common type of world in the cosmos becomes a candidate. Icy moons aren't rare. Around every gas giant in every star system, there are probably many of them, cold, distant, shrouded in ice. We could call them exo-titans. Each one with the right mix of internal heat, organic chemistry, and a reservoir of liquid methane or ethane could host its own slow biosphere. The number of potentially life-bearing worlds in the Milky Way doesn't just go up. It explodes. Habitability stops being a question of real estate. It becomes a question of chemistry. The lesson from Titan is that life isn't about a specific distance from a specific star. It's about a simple, universal recipe, a stable liquid medium, a usable source of energy, and a chemistry complex enough to build structures that persist and evolve. That recipe can be cooked in a warm, sunlit kitchen like Earth's, or it can be prepared in the cold, dark pantry of an outer moon, using completely different ingredients. This broader view turns our perspective inside out. We aren't the center of the biological universe. We're just one expression of a universal principle. A principle that finds a way, in heat or in cold, in water or in methane, to begin the slow work of becoming. Water is life's solvent here on Earth, but on Titan, in those dark methane seas, it would be poison. That's the complete inversion in this idea. For something made of silanes floating in liquid methane, touching liquid water or even water ice would be catastrophic. The chemistry is brutal. Water molecules are polar. They carry a slight charge, and that charge is drawn to the bonds in a silane molecule. It attacks them. It inserts itself. That process is called hydrolysis. It breaks the long chains apart. The silicon, now free, grabs the oxygen from the water. It forms silicon dioxide. Silica, sand, rock. Instantly, the complex architecture of a hypothetical organism would shatter. Its information-carrying polymers would unravel. Its siloxane membranes would dissolve. The whole being would essentially petrify, turn from a living pattern into an inert, crystalline residue, a fossil in a flash. Think about the environment. Titan's surface is covered in water ice. It's the bedrock, but that ice is as hard as granite at those temperatures. It's geology. It's not a threat if it stays frozen. The real danger is liquid water, and on Titan, liquid water isn't common on the surface, but it might exist in terrifying, episodic events, a comet impact. A chunk of dirty ice slams into the moon. The kinetic energy is immense. It creates a temporary, searing pool of molten water, a lake of scalding poison right in the hydrocarbon landscape. For any methane-dwelling life there, it would be an apocalypse. The hot water would mix with the cold methane. It would hydrolyze everything in its path. Leave behind a sterile patch of silica and altered organics, a chemical burn scar. There's another, slower threat. Scientists think Titan has a subsurface ocean. A vast layer of liquid water, maybe mixed with ammonia, deep under the ice. In places, this warmer water might seep upward through cracks and cryovolcanic vents. If such a seep reached a methane lake, it would be a slow, creeping poison, a toxic plume spreading through the dark sea. It wouldn't need to be hot. Even liquid water near freezing would trigger that fatal hydrolysis. A community near a vent could be silently, steadily turned to stone, their ecosystem erased by a trickle from a different world beneath them. This flips a fundamental assumption. We search for water because for us, it's synonymous with life. It's the non-negotiable ingredient. But here, in this theory, water is the ultimate contaminant. The substance that would end a biosphere, not begin it. It shows the radical context dependency of the universe. There is no universal good, no universal necessity. Only local conditions and local solutions. A substance that is the foundation of one biology is the destroyer of another. It creates a profound isolation. A silicon-methane biosphere and a carbon-water biosphere could not coexist. They would be chemically incompatible, mutually toxic. If we ever found life on Titan, and later found life in the subsurface ocean of Europa, we would have discovered two separate biological universes, existing in the same star system but forever separated by a simple, lethal chemical barrier. They could never meet, they could never interact. One's medium is the other's poison. This isolation might be the rule. It suggests the cosmos could be filled with islands of biology, each flourishing in its own unique chemical niche, each utterly alien and fatal to the others. Our search isn't for one kind of life, it's for many kinds, each living in its own private, chemical universe, unaware of the others. Their shape would be a conversation with the cold dark. In that low gravity, with liquid methane so thick, an organism wouldn't fight the environment. It would become an expression of it. Efficiency dictates the form. For something that feeds by absorbing chemicals from the sea, the ideal shape maximizes contact, so you get vast, thin sheets, living films drifting in the current. Meters across but millimeters thick, like dark veils in the hydrocarbon gloom. Their entire surface is a slow, hungry membrane, soaking in dissolved acetylene and ethane. Or imagine them draped across the lakebed, forming expansive mats that creep outward at a pace we can't see. They'd be less like creatures and more like a living part of the landscape. Other forms might choose a different strategy. A gelatinous blob, a cohesive mass of that silane-based gel, could slowly ooze across the sediments. Its movement wouldn't be a directed crawl, but a gradual gravitational flow. Like cold honey finding a path, it might move to follow a faint chemical scent, its whole body a sensory organ and a stomach in one. Inside, it wouldn't have bones. But it might have structure. Crystalline acetylene harvested from the rain could form a delicate lattice within the gel, a supporting scaffold of solid hydrocarbons grown from its own metabolism. An internal skeleton made of ice and organic crystals. Their color tells the story of their depth. Near the surface, under the dim orange haze, ultraviolet radiation is a threat. There, life would be dark. It would wear the hues of the tholins that rain down deep reds, browns, blacks to absorb that harmful energy and maybe even use it. But in the perpetual midnight of the deep abyss, where no light penetrates, color has no purpose. Organisms there could be utterly transparent or ghostly pale, visible only by the slight way they bend the liquid around them. Invisible ghosts in a dark sea. Movement, for the most part, would be a luxury. Active swimming costs too much energy in that thick fluid, so motion becomes a subtle, patient art. The most likely method is buoyancy control. An organism might have small internal sacs filled with gases like nitrogen or methane. By adjusting the chemistry inside those sacs, it could make itself slightly heavier or lighter than the surrounding liquid. It would then rise or sink with majestic slowness, drifting between the nutrient-rich depths and the chemical gradients nearer the surface, a vertical migration that could take months to complete. The sum of these adaptations paints a picture of a morphology utterly alien. We wouldn't see creatures that resemble fish or squid. We'd see what looks like geology that has decided to persist. Slow-growing organic reefs coating the vents, undulating mats carpeting the shallows, delicate, crystalline trees of acetylene ice built by a gel that flows around them. They would seem, to our eyes, like features of the world itself, not visitors to the environment, but manifestations of it. This is a biology where the line between the living and the non-living is blurred. Written in the slow, patient language of chemical equilibrium and persistent, flowing form, the energy scarcity there changes everything. Earth gets this flood of sunlight. Plants use it, animals eat the plants, energy moves through huge networks. Titan gets maybe 1% of that. Its sun is just a dim disk, hazy through that orange atmosphere. So the energy budget for life isn't generous. It's a strict ration, a world of conservation, not abundance. The main source wouldn't be light, it would be chemistry. And the chemical energy is limited to acetylene rain, hydrogen coming up from below, slow reactions on the lakebed. They release energy, but in tiny amounts. Whisper quantities like faint embers. The total chemical power across an entire sea, like Kraken Mare, is staggeringly small. It sets a hard ceiling. A law of thermodynamics, there's only so much energy, and that energy dictates the scale of life. This poverty imposes constraints, first on biomass. There can't be a lot of living material. It wouldn't be a teeming sea. It would be sparse, isolated, vast volumes of liquid methane, kilometers between small colonies. These colonies would be like oases, microbial mats on a vent, a drifting patch of film, separated by immense, empty stretches where the energy gradient is too weak to support anything. Second, it constrains complexity. Energy-intensive features become luxuries. No energy for rapid movement, no energy for a large, warm body, and certainly no energy for a complex nervous system. For thought or rapid reaction or consciousness, every biochemical process has to be exquisitely efficient, tuned over eons to waste nothing. An organism's metabolism would be a masterpiece of minimalism. A slow, precise lock and key, capturing every joule from a reaction that's almost imperceptible. So you get a biosphere on the edge, not robust like Earth's. It's tenuous, fragile, a delicate balance in the deep freeze. A shift in the rain's chemistry or the upwelling from the lakebed could tip it. An entire colony, millennia of slow growth, could just cease. Its reactions slowing to a halt, dissolving back into the sea. Life there wouldn't roar. It would persist in a state of quiet, desperate efficiency, a whisper in the silence. And that's not a failure. It's the ultimate triumph of adaptation, to not just survive, but to build a sustained order where the universe provided almost nothing. It shows life not as explosive power, but as infinite patience, impeccable economy. Reproduction here isn't a quick burst, it's slow, it's geological. Think of a film of silane-based gel drifting, a creature that spends 500 years absorbing chemical energy from the rain, growing millimeter by millimeter. Into a sheet the size of a city block, it reaches a threshold, a point of chemical instability written into its structure, and then the process begins. It doesn't split in an instant. Its siloxane membrane, that resilient skin, starts to thin along a line. The thinning is a chemical process, a rearrangement of molecules that might take a decade. The two have slowly begin to pull apart, connected by only the thinnest strands of gel. This separation could span 50 years. A century after it started, the final strands dissolve. Two new beings drift free, each carrying half the mass and the chemical memory of the original. This is binary fission measured in human lifetimes, or reproduction could be a strategy of patience. Of dispersal, an organism forms specialized structures in its gel, pockets where the chemistry is different. Over decades, these pockets harden into resilient capsules. Spores armored against the cold. When ready, the capsule is released, not launched with force. It just detaches, begins a slow descent or a slow ascent through the methane sea. It could drift for 1,000 years, 10,000, carried by the languid currents of Kraken Mare. It's a time capsule of potential life. Its germination isn't triggered by warmth or light, but by stumbling into a specific chemical gradient. Maybe it settles onto a lakebed seep, where hydrogen concentration is just right. Only then, after millennia of dormancy, does its armored shell soften. It begins to absorb the local chemistry, to unfold its internal template. to start the multi-century work of growing into a new mat. This is reproduction as a message in a bottle. Tossed into a sea of time, transferring the genetic code here is a monumental task. In our cells, replication is a frantic, enzyme-driven race. Here, it's a stately dance. A long polymer chain, a silicon-based analog of DNA, lies suspended in the thick, cold gel. Individual molecular building blocks drift through the fluid. Silane beads, they bump against the chain. If their shape matches the template, a bond slowly forms, reluctantly. This isn't assisted by fast-acting enzymes. It's driven by chemical affinity and patience. A single replication of the genome could take years. With such a slow process, error rates would be significant. A misplaced bead, a skipped section, but the timescale changes the consequence. A generation isn't a day or a year, it's a century. There is vast time for correction mechanisms to work, slowly scanning and repairing mistakes. And if an error persists, natural selection still operates, but its pace is glacial. A slightly more efficient metabolic pathway from a mutation might take 10,000 years to become common. Evolution here isn't a series of rapid adaptations. It's the slow, inevitable tilting of a landscape, where advantages accumulate with the patience of continental drift. In such a system, reproduction loses its association with proliferation. You don't have countless offspring hoping a few survive. You have a few offspring, crafted with immense care over immense time, designed for near-certain survival in a stable, if sparse, environment. The goal isn't to fill the sea can't support that. The goal is to ensure the pattern continues, to place another persistent chemical system into the flow, one that will carry the torch for the next 1,000 years. Reproduction becomes an act of legacy. A single organism might only reproduce once in its millennium of existence, ensuring its unique solution to survival is passed on. This transforms the life cycle. It's not a circle. It's a long, slow line stretching into the deep future, a thread of persistent chemistry woven through geological time. Even the slowest life leaves a mark. On Titan, a silicon-based mat growing for 1,000 years across a lakebed becomes part of the landscape. Its delicate filaments weave through the sediment, a living net holding grains in place. Over millennia, that stabilizes whole areas of the seafloor. Currents shift loose material elsewhere, but the anchored mats create these distinct, raised platforms. And as generations of organisms live and reach their resting state, their remains settle, not in layers of sand, but in layers of complex organic polymers, subtle mineral byproducts. A geological record written by biology, each thin stratum tells a story: chemical conditions, metabolic preferences, a slow, persistent presence. These layered structures would look like stromatolites from another world. But not built by microbes in a warm, shallow sea. These would be monuments of a frozen, methane-dwelling community. Their existence is a biosignature etched into the bedrock. The chemistry of life becomes geology, and the metabolic processes aren't perfectly clean. They have waste. In that cold, non-polar solvent, certain byproducts might be insoluble. They precipitate out of the liquid methane as fine, solid particles, tiny crystals of novel organic minerals, or complex silicon-bearing compounds that have no abiotic reason to form in that specific pattern. These particles rain down, adding a unique signature to the sediments. A layer rich in a particular, oddly structured molecule could be the fossilized echo of a metabolic pathway. A chemical fingerprint waiting in the deep freeze for an instrument to find it. Even gases could be a clue. If a widespread community produced a trace gas as a byproduct, hydrogen sulfide or a specific hydrocarbon, it could create a localized anomaly in the atmosphere just above a large lake. A faint, persistent plume that chemistry alone can't explain. A whisper on the wind, a breath from a silent sea. Now scale this up over billions of years. If a biosphere established itself across Titan's major methane seas, its cumulative effect could be planetary. The global distribution of organic compounds on the surface would shift. There might be a measurable depletion of acetylene in regions with large lakes, beyond what simple atmospheric chemistry predicts, or an enrichment of certain complex polymers in the dune fields, blown there from the shores of ancient, biologically active seas. These would be subtle imbalances, gentle tilts in the chemical equilibrium of an entire world. They wouldn't shout, they would murmur, but to a sensitive enough probe, that murmur tells a profound story. Evidence that the chemistry of Titan is not just happening, it's being curated, manipulated by a persistent, patient force that takes in the raw materials of the world and outputs something slightly, meaningfully different. And this blurs the ultimate line. On Earth, we see a clear distinction between the living and the non-living, between biology and geology, but in an environment like Titan's, that distinction may dissolve. A silicon-based mat is both a living community and a geological feature. Its waste products become new minerals. Its structure shapes the landscape. In such a place, life doesn't just exist within the environment. It becomes a fundamental, active component of the environment's ongoing evolution. The planet and its potential inhabitants engaged in a slow, billion-year dance. A co-evolution of world and being, where one cannot be understood without the other. To find such a signature is to discover that biology is not a passenger on a geological world. It is one of the world's essential shaping processes, a silent architect working in the dark with time as its only tool. The journey from chemistry to life starts with one step. And on Earth, that step was warm and wet. On Titan, it's cold, dark, built from different pieces. The first challenge is just making the building blocks. Complex silane monomers don't just appear, they have to be forged. That process probably begins in the sky, with that constant drizzle of tholin particles. These carbon-rich, sooty flakes dissolve into the liquid methane sea. It creates a dilute organic broth. Inside that broth, under the moon's faint internal warmth or maybe a zap from a cosmic ray, fragments could rearrange. A silicon atom may be leached from water-ice bedrock, bonds with carbon and hydrogen chains from the tholins. That forms the first simple silanes, the monomers. The individual letters of a potential new alphabet. It's a slow chemistry, molecule by molecule, across an entire ocean. Over millions of years, with monomers present, the next step is linking them. Polymerization on Earth that often needs energy or catalysts. On Titan, the energy could come from gentle geothermal warmth seeping up from a cryovolcanic vent, or from the rare impact of a high-energy particle piercing the liquid from above. In these microenvironments, silane monomers bump together. Their bonds are stable in the cold, but they can link when nudged by that tiny energy input. They form dimers, then trimers, then longer chains. These silane polymers aren't life yet. They're just longer, more complex molecules. But complexity is the raw material order can emerge from. Imagine them drifting in the dark, like strands of invisible thread in a vast, cold sea. A chain floating alone is fragile. The third step is organization. Somehow these polymers have to become a distinct entity, separate from the surrounding sea. This is where siloxanes come in. Those silicon-oxygen chains are stable in the non-polar methane. And they have a property that could be crucial. They can form films. At some interface, maybe where the liquid meets a tiny grain of tholin-rich sediment, a collection of siloxane molecules might spontaneously arrange into a bilayer. A microscopic, resilient pouch, and inside that pouch, by chance, gets trapped a tangle of those silane polymers. Now you have a protocell, a microscopic droplet of a different chemistry, encapsulated by a membrane floating in the methane. It's not alive, but it is a compartment, a private space where a different set of chemical reactions can play out. protected from the endless dilution of the open sea. The final leap is replication, the most mysterious one. How does this encapsulated system become self-sustaining, self-copying? The answer might be autocatalysis. Inside that siloxane pouch, among the tangled silane polymers, one particular chain might have a shape that encourages the formation of another chain just like itself. It acts as a template, not with the precision of DNA, but with a crude chemical affinity. As raw monomers drift through the membrane, they stick to this template and link up. Eventually, a copy is made. This new chain might float free, or the pouch might grow and divide. The system is now autocatalytic. It makes more of what makes it. It's crossed a threshold from a chance arrangement of chemicals into a self-perpetuating pattern. It consumes the tholin broth to build more of itself. That's the spark, not a spark of heat or light, a spark of persistent, self-reinforcing chemistry. Each of these steps is shrouded in uncertainty. The probabilities seem vanishingly small. But Titan offers two immense gifts to this process: time and continuity. The environment in those lakes has likely been stable for billions of years. The reign of organics has been constant. The cold has been unrelenting. This isn't a brief experiment. It's a planetary-scale laboratory that's been running uninterrupted for epochs longer than all of human history. In that setting, even the most improbable event, given enough trials and enough millennia, becomes not just possible, perhaps inevitable. What we see as a series of fantastic hurdles, the silent, patient chemistry of a frozen world, may see as a gentle slope, leading slowly but surely from chaos toward a new, persistent kind of order. The raw ingredients for this alien biology, they're not rare. They're actually some of the most common things out there. You look up at the night sky, at the dark spaces between the stars. Those aren't empty. They're filled with these vast molecular clouds, cold and dark, where chemistry starts. And in those clouds, silicon atoms are everywhere. It's the seventh most common element in the whole galaxy. The dust that eventually forms planets and moons, it's full of silicon. And right alongside it, you have simple hydrocarbons: methane, ethane, acetylene. These aren't special, complex molecules. They're some of the basic building blocks of organic chemistry, and they're scattered all over. We see their signatures in the light from distant nebulae. We find them in comets, those frozen time capsules from our solar system's beginning. They're in the atmospheres of gas giants, from Jupiter to planets around other stars. The universe, in its big elemental recipe, is always mixing silicon and hydrocarbons. The potential for this chemistry is written into the cosmos itself. And that changes the question. It moves this from a thought experiment about one moon to a real possibility for countless worlds. If the conditions are right, a cold, stable world with liquid methane on the surface, then the basic ingredients are almost certainly already there. They come as standard equipment. This universality suggests something. The potential for silicon methane life isn't some rare fluke dependent on a unique chemical accident. It's a pathway the universe's own abundance makes available. Wherever you get a Titan-like world, a cold body with a thick atmosphere and liquid hydrocarbons, the kitchen is already stocked. The elements are on the shelf. The laws of chemistry are the same. So if the process from chemistry to persistent, evolving systems is possible, if those slow steps from monomers to membranes to replication can happen, then the scale of the cosmos suggests it probably has happened. Not just here in our backyard, but out there, in the silent, frozen seas of exomoons around distant gas giants. The prevalence of the materials means if this form of life can happen, it probably has happened. Somewhere in the vast dark, under an alien sun, a different kind of biology may have taken root in the deep cold, not built from the stuff of Earth, but from the universe's own common, dusty abundance. But that search, it carries a real weight. If we seriously think Titan could hold a different kind of life, then the whole exploration changes. It stops being just a mission of discovery. It becomes something more like careful archaeology, ethical archaeology. The Dragonfly rotorcraft, before it ever launches, will go through an intense cleaning. Every part, every surface gets sterilized to an extreme degree. The goal is to remove any trace of Earth microbes. Even though our bacteria aren't built for liquid methane, they're still hardy. Complex organic packages, bringing them into Titan's pristine setting could be a form of pollution. They might not survive, but they could die there. Decompose, scatter foreign biomolecules across the landscape that could contaminate the very probiotic chemistry we want to study. It could muddy the delicate, native signals we're trying to hear. Or worse, it could disrupt a young biosphere before it even gets a chance to show itself. So planetary protection, it's not about fear. It's about preserving the integrity of a unique experiment. One that's been running alone for billions of years, and that leads to a deeper question, a philosophical one. If we do find evidence of that slow, cold life, what then? How do we study it without causing harm? Our instruments are built for analysis, but their presence is an intrusion. A rotorcraft landing on an organic dune, its skids pressing into Tholen sands that might be part of a vast, slow metabolic network. That's an event. On that world's timescale, it's seismic. The heat from its power source, the tiny vibrations, even the chemical exhaust from its instruments, these aren't neutral. To a biosphere running on a whisper of energy on a calendar of millennia, our visit is a violent storm, a deafening one, so the ethical need shifts. It goes beyond just non-contamination. It becomes a principle of minimal impact. We have to learn to observe from a distance, to sample with the lightest touch. To listen, not shout, and that forces us to face a fundamental value. Does a silicon-based mat drifting in a methane sea have intrinsic worth? Our historical view of life's value is tied to familiarity, to consciousness, complexity, a vitality we recognize. But here's a form of being that shows none of those traits in a way we understand. It may have no nervous system, no awareness, no capacity for suffering as we define it. Its value lies purely in its existence. As a self-sustaining, evolving chemical system, it's a new branch on the tree of life. One that grew in total darkness, and that alone, its sheer, improbable persistence against cosmic indifference, that might be the source of its significance. It expands what we consider precious, what's worth protecting in the universe. These questions move us out of the lab, into philosophy, into ethics. They ask us to define our role not just as scientists but as stewards. As guests, we're at the threshold. We could become the first species to encounter another, wholly independent genesis of life, and with that privilege comes an immense responsibility. A responsibility to approach with humility, to put understanding before conquest, to protect the fragile, silent neighbors we might find. So then, our exploration becomes a test. A test of our own maturity. Can we go into the dark not as conquerors, but as careful listeners, respectful ones? The future of how we relate to the cosmos, it might depend on that answer. The ultimate proof might not be out there on a distant moon. It could come from a lab right here. Synthetic biology is learning to read and edit the code of life. But its biggest goal isn't just editing, it's building life from nothing, using new chemistries. So one day, researchers could take that blueprint for Titan, the silane polymers, the siloxane membranes, the methane solvent, and try to assemble it. Not to find alien life, but to make it. That's xenobiology, studying truly alternative life forms. The goal would be to build the simplest possible self-sustaining system that fits the models. A droplet in a chilled chamber following silicon rules. If that worked, it would do more than validate a theory. It would break a paradigm. It would prove in a controlled way that life's principles aren't bound to one molecule or one solvent or one temperature. Life is a set of abstract, organizational rules. They can be instantiated in different physical stuff. Success would tell us life is, in a deep sense, a technology. A reproducible phenomenon of matter and energy with the right instructions and conditions. The implications spread out. Practically, it could start new forms of industry. Imagine manufacturing processes designed by xenobiologists, specialized synthetic cells operating in extreme cold, building materials or purifying chemicals where normal machinery fails. Living machines engineered for a purpose, thriving in places we call inhospitable, but the deeper weight is existential. If we can build a living system from silicon and methane in a lab, it means the universe has almost certainly done the same somewhere, given enough time and the right setting. It changes life from a historical accident on one lucky planet into an expected outcome of cosmic chemistry. We would have shown that biology isn't a singular miracle. It's an emergent property of complex chemistry, a property that can arise in multiple ways. This act of creation would complete a circle. For centuries, we've defined life by the only example we had. By building a second, independent example, we'd finally have a comparative biology. We could ask universal questions. What features are necessary in any living system? What's just a contingent detail of our own history? The answers would redefine our place. We would no longer be solitary children of a unique genesis. We'd be practitioners of a universal art. The silent potential in Titan's dark seas would be confirmed not by a signal from afar, but by a quiet hum from a glass vessel on our own world. A hum we orchestrated ourselves. The theory shows us something deeper than alien biology. It shows us what life actually is. If you take away the carbon, the water, the warm blood, what's left is a process. A set of rules, information that keeps going, that copies itself, something that takes in energy, something that can change over time. Those are the universal things. Carbon and water, they're just one answer, a really good one, but not the only one. So you stop looking for planets like ours. You start looking for any place where that process could keep going, no matter what it's made of. The chemistry is incredibly flexible. Nature is good at swapping parts. Here, carbon builds things and holds information. Somewhere like Titan, silicon could do that job. A siloxane film could act like a cell membrane. It makes a boundary, a self. The atoms are different, but the need is the same. You need a container. You need reactions. You need a way to pass things on. It's like realizing a story doesn't need ink and paper. You could write it with frost on a window or with light inside a crystal. The material changes, but the story of lasting, of adapting, that stays. This flexibility means life is tenacious. It's not some delicate thing that needs perfect conditions. It's an opportunist. If there's any energy to use, any stable spot, it'll find a way. A boiling vent, a dark ocean under ice, a frozen sea of methane. If there's a difference it can use, a gradient, life will probably find it. The universe might be full of these quiet, stubborn pockets of order, holding on in places we thought were empty. Our idea of habitable has been too small, and that brings the last point, the humbling one. Our biology isn't the blueprint, it's just one example. One experiment in a huge cosmic lab, a beautiful, complex experiment, but just one. To think all life has to look like us, that's arrogance. Life is more creative than that. More varied, more patient. We're not the center of it. We're part of a much older, much wider conversation. A conversation that doesn't happen in one language, but in every chemical dialect there is. Understanding that it doesn't make our story smaller. It puts it inside something huge, something majestic. We're part of a phenomenon that's bigger than planets or elements or temperature. A phenomenon that, just by trying to keep going, paints little patterns of order in the dark. This journey doesn't end with an answer. It ends with a different way of seeing. We followed a thread of logic from our warm, watery world to a distant moon with frozen hydrocarbon seas. We traded carbon for silicon, water for methane, rapid fire for glacial patience. We built a theoretical biology from the ground up, piece by alien piece, and in doing that, we did something more important than sketching a creature. We dismantled a cage. The cage was our own assumption. That life has to look like us, act like us, be built like us. The possibility that a self-sustaining chemical system could arise from silanes in liquid methane, that shatters the assumption completely. It proves the principles of life, persistence, replication, evolution. They aren't married to Earth's chemistry. They're universal laws of organization, waiting to express themselves wherever the conditions allow. The building blocks are common. The energy, however faint, is available. The time is unimaginably vast. That transforms the search from a hunt for a reflection into an exploration for portraits. We're no longer just looking for Earth 2.0. We're listening for the slow, deep hum of biology in all its possible forms. The definitive proof rests with future missions, like Dragonfly analyzing the dunes of Titan, but the very act of considering this possibility has already changed us. It stretched our imagination to include the profoundly strange and the deeply cold. It asks us to find beauty not in familiar vitality, but in silent, enduring order. It reminds us the universe is under no obligation to create life in our image. Its creativity is boundless. Its palette is far broader than we ever dreamed. So as we turn our eyes and our instruments back to the stars, we carry this openness with us. We look at every frozen moon, every hazy exoplanet, not with a checklist of what we know. With a question of what could be. The greatest discovery awaiting us may not be a message. It may be a pattern, a whisper of chemistry persisting in the dark, written in a language we have only just begun to learn.